Are you afraid of a possible World War III? Uh, there is the chance of that happening. Of course, I am concerned. I wouldn't say it's likely. I think it's still unlikely, but you never know. And the people who are leading countries on either side of this possible conflict have to be mindful of the power they are wielding. When we have nuclear weapons, nuclear arsenals all around, this is really, really scary. And people have to calm down and they have to be very, very careful with their rhetoric, with their actions, and with their provocations. And I think we are at a point where there is bellicose rhetoric, teetering on the edge of outright hatred, and just mindless hatred. And there is also provocations. There are provocations going on, and I don't like it. And I think it's not the right way to continue. I think what we have a major casualty in our era, like at least in the countries I know more about, in the Western so-called countries, what we have lost is subtlety, is nuance. Like you have one extremist saying the most extreme thing, and then instead of having a moderate telling this person, "Hey, what are you talking about? Are you out of your mind? Are you totally unhinged?" Instead of having that, we have the opposite extremist saying the other most extreme thing. And I think this is a toxic cocktail because this creates a climate of fear, a climate of intolerance, and the reasonable people cannot be heard. And all you hear about is those extreme voices, this highly vociferous and highly misanthropic people, and that's not good at all. So, yeah, I'm not happy. I would say we are still not likely facing World War III, but it's not unlikely either, and that's terrible in and of itself. Let's see. Prot, are you aware of the Royal Air Force Akrotiri? If so, what do you think of its presence in Cyprus and NATO, American and English presence in Cyprus in general? So, for those who don't know, the Republic of Cyprus is an independent country, a member of the United Nations. Uh, it gained its independence in 1960, and it was a former colony of the British Empire. As a legacy of the British colonialism, there are two military bases in Cyprus. One is in Akrotiri, the other one is in Dekelia. And these are sovereign military bases. So technically, this is not Cyprus. This is not the Republic of Cyprus. This is the United Kingdom, right? So what I think about them, I am not a fan. I cannot be a fan of any form of colonialism, and I cannot be a fan of any form of post-colonial military presence in any of the former colonies, whether this is Cyprus or this is any other country, right? So it's not Cyprus specific. Whether it serves the interests of NATO or whatever, of course it does, and that's why it's here. But whether that is a good thing or not, I mean, earlier we were talking about World War III. I don't think NATO is a force for good. And I think NATO started out as a good idea, like, a defensive alliance, but it hasn't been a defensive alliance for a very long time now. I don't think it was a defensive alliance when it was doing these campaigns away from home. When you are bombing other countries in what is actually an offensive war, I don't think that counts as a defensive alliance anymore. So I am not a fan of NATO. This does not mean that I justify the other forces, right? I am not a fan of those either. I am not a fan of imperialism in general. I believe in the self-determination of peoples. I believe in the independence of countries. I believe in countries that do not interfere everywhere. Like why do the Brits or the French or the Americans or whomever need to have a presence in Africa, in the Middle East, in Asia, in Latin America, or whatever? Why? I don't understand. I don't want that. I want countries to be more peaceful and to mind their own business. And if there are countries that have a different political culture than yours, maybe you don't agree with those, and I don't agree with those for sure. But I don't think you can fix them either. Like you see what happened in Afghanistan, for example, 2 decades fighting the Taliban, and what do you do in the end? You give the country back to the Taliban. So what what is the point? But anyway, and it's not an isolated case. But anyway, what do you think on the future of free software? Large language models are too big to be created by the Free Software Foundation or enthusiasts. Training data is unfree. Developers use Copilot and VSC. I'm not sure what's that, but probably something with AI. Environments where AI writes large parts of the code. How to compete? Uh, I don't think we can compete the way you frame it because we are understaffed and underfunded. But it's not just, or let me put it differently. We is not just the free software geeks, right? I don't think we have to have this kind of limited understanding of ourselves. I think we have to have a bigger picture understanding of our place in society. So, of course, I am a free software enthusiast, but I am not just that. I am also a member of a society, and maybe I can enlighten my fellow citizens on these issues, which have far reaching implications on matters of labor rights, on matters of the distribution of resources in the society, and on matters of politics by extension, and basically educate or inform or help citizens around me, and all of us together, maybe we can have a critical mass to make some thoroughgoing reform. So maybe I, as an individual, or we as, nerds, basically, free software geeks or whatever, maybe we don't have enough power. But we are not isolated. There are many other people who would be interested in this kind of cause. Raymond asks, as a free software enthusiast, why still use Microsoft GitHub? I read about your source code experience. That UX is indeed too different, but Codeberg is really good. Why not set an example and move? Well, that's good. I haven't checked Codeberg, so I don't know what to expect. But of course, Microsoft GitHub, right? And here, Google YouTube. And we could even say, banks about money, they are also not exactly saints. Um, I think we also have to be pragmatic. Like GitHub is, of course, controlled by a corporation that I don't like at all, but at the same time is a place where we get a lot of contributions into free software projects. So there is a balancing act. Like, do I want to move somewhere where nobody will find my code, but I will technically be free? Or do I want to be somewhere where people will use my code, will contribute to my code, the package will be better, and okay, what can we do? We have to deal with Microsoft. We have to deal with Microsoft anyway. So I personally don't think that trying to hide from all those corporations is working. I think that is a losing strategy, because if you are consistent with that, you will have to be a cave person. Like if you are consistent not just with software but generally, if you're like, oh, I disagree with banks, therefore I won't use money. Oh, I disagree with big pharma, therefore I won't take drugs, pharmaceutics. Oh, I disagree with, the meat industry or the vegetables industry or whatever, therefore I won't eat or whatever. Like, where do you draw the line? Eventually, you have to be realistic. And I don't think the solution is by withdrawing. I think the solution is political. And the solution is to have policies that curtail the monopolistic or oligopolistic power of these mega corporations. And I don't think we can basically hide. We have to meet them head on, and we have to control them, like what the European Union did with Apple, for example, the case of Apple and its tax avoidance in Ireland. So I think that's the right move, but I would like to see much more of that. Agree with your political stance. Imperialism is a poison to humanity. My question would be, how do you position yourself along or against the concepts dialectical and historical materialism? I am not a fan of them. I am not a fan of Hegel's concept in general, like the metaphysics of dialectical whatever, because that is not what dialectical meant in ancient Greece. But anyway, I don't think it's constructive. I don't think this kind of thesis and antithesis, which leads to a synthesis at the global scale, makes sense for the simple fact that one thesis does not have a single antithesis. There are many possible antitheses, and not all of them lead to syntheses, and not all syntheses are equally tenable or good. But more practically, I don't think it's a useful way to understand what is happening. In the case of Marx, I don't think the Marxian framework is very insightful. For me, at least, I don't think it gives me insights. And to my point, we have in the left, because I am a leftist, we have in the left lots of people who are intellectuals, like how well they have studied Marx and all those Marxists after Marx, and basically it becomes like a self-referential kind of exercise in intellectuality, which is decoupled from the labor movement and practical issues. And if you read some Marxist texts, basically you have to read them 3 times just to be sure that you got the words correctly. So who among the people, the working class, is going to actually read that and make any sense of it? And it's no coincidence that historically the far right has appealed to the working class. Because the far right, you may say I disagree, and I disagree with the far right, but you have to understand what works. The far right uses practical language, which is of a certain type that I disagree with, but uses practical language and talks about everyday issues. And then you have Marxists in their ivory tower, some office at some university, talking about dialectical, historical materialism, blah blah blah. Nobody cares. It's for the internal consumption among intellectuals. Nobody cares in real life, and that's why we had historically the far right taking the appealing to the working class, and the response from the intellectual left was that this is what's the name? I forget right now. The vulgar socialism or something. I forget the word right now. But basically, it's false socialism. It doesn't matter if you give it a name. What matters is what happens, and what happens is not good. And what I want is practical talk. And what I want is intellectuals who use their knowledge, who use their intelligence, who use their position to connect technical issues with everyday affairs, and who are there to be helpful to everyday people and not to pontificate about something abstract that nobody understands. And if we talk about more modern, intellectual currents, where you have, like the postmodernism, I think that is completely decoupled from anything remotely practical. Let's say, hi Prot, hello to you as well. Agree, a commune is vital, no man is an island, for sure. And this is, of course, because we talked about the Marxists earlier, this is, of course, like the whole idea of communism in the original sense, right? The idea of a community, right? And it's not about the Soviet Empire. That's completely different. So let's continue. Let's see. Matthew, what do you think about the future of free software where Linux using GNU version 2, I guess you mean GPL, the GNU General Public License version 2, ripping people and people's codes, breaking things? We now discriminate based on location, and who says it ends with Russia? Indeed, this is concerning. However, I don't think we need to be alarmist yet. The Linux Foundation is, of course, a legal entity registered in the United States of America, and they have to conform with American law, for better or worse. We may say, okay, I disagree, or I agree, or whatever, but regardless of what we think, they have to conform with the law. They cannot do otherwise. And again, this comes back to politics. I think that we see again and again, whether it is with AI, whether it is with big corporations, whether it is with foreign affairs, we see again and again that we cannot escape from politics. Like, you want to be apolitical, but politics will find you. They care about you. So you will never escape politics. And if we don't understand this point and we continue thinking that we will live in our own nerdy kind of utopia, our little bubble where we are not affected by anyone, I think we are making a mistake. And I think we have to consider the political magnitudes, and the people who are, let's say, in America and they care about this case of the Linux kernel um, discriminating against people from Russia. Well, of course, one way to fix this is to fix your relations with Russia. You don't fix it, locally for the kernel only. It won't work. Of course, how do we fix the relations with Russia? It's not an easy problem. I don't say it's an easy problem. And it's not just the Americans. I don't mean to say it's only them. Of course, it's a difficult situation. It's a complex issue. But we have to start from somewhere. And we have to understand that free software is not basically its own little world. It's part of society. So by extension, it gets affected by politics. What is your opinion? What is your opinion on Cornelius Castoriadis? Castoriadis is a Greek 20th century philosopher who became a philosopher in France and was influenced by the French tradition. I personally consider Castoriadis a French philosopher. I don't mean to say that he is French, but in terms of his philosophy, I think he is of that tradition or that school of thought. A very interesting thinker, a very penetrating thinker, insightful, a polymath, which I always admire. Um, I haven't studied all of his works to be able to have a good opinion. The Imaginary Institution of Society, which probably is his seminal work. It's 4:30, folks, so I will finish with this and the next question. Okay, I finish with those. So the Imaginary Institution of Society is a very good work, and I think it makes a case which the salient point of is what Protagoras also said all those years ago, which is pandon chrimaton metron anthropos. And what Protagoras was saying, this is mistranslated in English as, human is the measure of all things. And that's completely wrong. Human is the measure of all chrimata, of all things that have a use value. Think of money, think of institutions, think of law, these kinds of things. And connecting to Castoriadis, Cornelius Castoriadis, the imaginary institution of society is exactly that. Like, we have like a narrative and a collective imaginary, the myths, the stories we tell about who we are. Like in Europe, we say the European values. What are the European values? It's the narrative we have. And based on this narrative, we build institutions, we write law, we do everything. And the point of Castoriadis, the Protagorean point of Castoriadis, is that we have we have instituted them, and as such, we can reinstitute them. We can institute them anew. They are not outside of us. They are an extension of us. And so this idea that, oh, our values are sacrosanct is only true if we treat them as such. They are not sacrosanct intrinsically.